Cool. Awesome. So Ashley, sorry about the link. Did we
Okay.
reschedule, or did
No.
the link just not show through?
It just never came. And there was
Gotcha. Okay.
no way to email for it, so I was like, oh,
Okay. Maybe at the end of this, you can kind of show me what happened, because
yeah.
it happened last week too, and I want to make sure that I get that all sorted out. So
Okay. Yeah.
so yeah, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Tell me what you're doing, like where you're at in terms of, like, creatively, career-wise, whatever. And before that also, if you don't mind, how did you kind of find out about these portfolio reviews?
I think on TikTok. Honestly, I don't. Yeah, I think it was TikTok. I don't entirely remember. But I've been looking for like people to review my portfolio. So I'm a web and product designer. And I recently got laid off from my job. So now I'm redoing my portfolio to like freshen it up and looking for new jobs. My last place was mostly web, but I'm trying to move back into product. So I've been having like trouble with interviewers that my work is not product enough. And so I'm like, oh, struggling with it. Hence why I've been looking for people to help review and just get other people's thoughts on my site. And yeah, it's kind of where I'm at.
Gotcha. Okay. How long ago did you get laid off, if you don't mind me asking?
Like a month, just a month.
A month ago. And where are you located, by the way?
I'm in LA, but I was working remote. So
Okay, cool.
I'm open to like remote or hybrid. But
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Anything would work.
yeah.
Awesome. So you said you're having, how many interviews have you had since getting laid off?
Probably like 20. It's not all
Really?
at different companies, some at the same companies. Yeah, I've got like to round 5 with some companies up into the portfolio review, or like other places reach out to me and then they don't realize that I was on a website for my last job, and then they're like, oh, just kidding. So it's been a challenge.
What were you doing at your last job? Give me a little bit of background about that.
Yeah, so it was like a earlier startup, and so I was like one of the first designers, and I was working on their .io website, and then they have a developer focused website, so both of those. So it was under marketing. So technically I was doing marketing, not product, which is, yeah.
And before that, what were you doing?
I led a virtual reality team, which is random, but it was on an R&D group at Intuit. So it was just like emerging technologies, and we ended up doing virtual reality for like 3 years. And then before that, I would design the mobile app at Vimeo. So that was my product work. And then some little things before that.
All right, very cool. So you have like a ton of product experience. You have a ton of, sure, you could call it web marketing, whatever, but like in a way, I would consider myself still a product designer, even though it's just like website stuff. It's still the same basics, right? It's still the same skill sets, everything like that. Where do you think in the interview? So you said you made it to a couple final rounds, and you've had a ton of interviews since then. Where do you think is like the disconnect? Like what do you see happening? Because you have great Intuit and Vimeo are really great places to go. I know Vimeo actually, because I interviewed there a while ago, and they have some interesting stuff going on. So I know, like, that is really, really valuable. But like, where do you think, some of these interviews are going off the rails a bit?
Well, I haven't until recently. Until I've been redoing my site, I haven't had really well documented like full case studies. And so I think the breakdown is like, I have screens and stuff that look nice, but like there's no like meat in there about how I got there and the journey and the testing, or
Okay. And
so I've been trying to add that.
what roles are these for? Like, what level? Designer, product designer, like, what is it?
Yeah, product designer, like mid senior level.
Okay, cool. All right. So I mean, it sounds like, yeah, there's probably a bit of articulation that is needed for some of these projects and case studies, because I think at that level of like a mid-level, senior level product designer, especially now, people are really, or jobs are really looking for, like, they're kind of being a little stuck up a bit, to be quite honest, which I think is unfair. Because I think in product, there's a lot of this talk of like process and, how do we solve problems that are like super unique when they're really not, and how do we articulate that? So I think like, everyone's looking for the perfect case study that has, every sort of bit and piece of like, here was the problem and here's all the research and all that stuff. So that could definitely be a part where you focus on. Is there, when you're going through these interviews, like say this one that you kind of mentioned about like the last round, and that's the part when you're showing your portfolio, like what is that process? Is it just like, hey, pull up your website and let's talk about some of your work?
Well, it's like you just present one of your pieces of work for an hour kind of thing. And then it's like
Okay,
me
cool.
and 9 other people on the interview.
Okay, so they're like really looking for that one project to last 40-ish minutes, to really go through, each part and, talk about all the teams and working together and all that stuff. Okay, cool. Why don't you pull up your portfolio? You can share your screen and, talk me through some of the things, or maybe pick out one of the projects that like you're most likely to show, and then kind of like walk me through it.
Yeah, so here we are. So I recently, this is the one where the company I just left, and so there's a little sensitive, so I have it under protection. But I would probably show, this one was self-made and it's still kind of in progress. But basically it's a care package delivery app where it's recipient defined, not sender defined. So I'll get into that. And then I broke it down by, I used the double diamond process. Like we've made 40 screens, 6 prototypes, 2 rounds of testing, all this, and then problem solution. Like the problem is like sometimes when I send care packages to friends, I don't know if they're going to actually want what I send. So it'd be great to have a way where like they define, oh, I like these things when I'm sick, or these things when I'm hungover or whatever. And then I can just go and send them like their own package. So I broke down the framework, like what is the problem we're trying to solve, like our audience. I ended up defining 2 audiences, like college-age kids and then parents. And then how does it influence the design? I decided to keep like a logged out section so people can quickly just use it and not have to worry about like gatekeeping or anything. It's like increases the time to value. I want to track via metrics so I can determine if like time spent in the app or retention is going well. And then customer feedback. I'm just like highly glossing over this for you.
Sure. Why did you pick this project to show me?
Because it's like pretty in depth and it's probably like more traditional product. I also, this is the Vimeo one. It's just not like, I don't have enough content. Like I don't have like the testing because they didn't really do that there, or we didn't really get feedback from people. So it's just a bunch of screens. So I like hesitate, like Vimeo is like literally real, but I hesitate showing it because there's not the like meat in there the same way that this one has meat.
Sure.
Where it's,
So immediately what comes to mind is that if you're showing a project that's hypothetical, as an interviewer, as someone that, is looking to hire, while yes, it shows that of all these things, it's still like a perfect world.
I know. Ugh.
And it's not like where's the business outcomes? So one, I would not show this project necessarily as like the first or second. I have your website up, so I'm going to also click through. So with Vimeo, right? Like we've all been in this problem where, I've experienced this a bunch where I would interview and they're like, okay, cool. Like looking for those business results. Right. And the teams that I were on were very early in a lot of the sort of like companies' business objectives. It's like, hey, they were starting a team and they brought me on to launch this thing.
Yeah.
And I have very little experience at the end of the day of like really seeing this like large product design campaign through, because again,
Yeah.
my role and where I kind of like to fit in with my work was like getting on teams early, working on the initial launch, and getting all of those things feeling good for that, like, business, that one business goal of like getting it out there. Um and so, when you would come up to those interviews and they are looking for those things, it's really important to like articulate, like, if that's the situation that you were in, or kind of give more background ahead of it, of like, instead of just, hey, yeah, I used to work at Vimeo and I launched this thing, you would
Right.
kind of need to paint the picture of, yeah, I joined Vimeo at this time. At that moment, we were, the company was looking to increase this and blah, 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 blah. And as when you start to do that, then you start to build yourself that business case of like, what were the business outcomes? Because this was the objective, right? We wanted to
Yeah.
get it out there and launch. How do we then, like after that happened, what was the result, right? And even if it is like, well, we saw a slight increase in this and blah, 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 that is then again better than, trying to sort of breeze over this because there was no really, like, you may have not had that experience of being able to mark all these different checkpoints throughout whatever it was you were working on.
Right.
So I mean, that is like one thing I think about when, you know projects like this, again, like, it's okay to be upfront with that situation, and I think it's even better to kind of put yourself in that, where you're kind of really acknowledging that, like, yeah, at the time there were only two other people on the team, or there wasn't really that many resources for this project, so I really took responsibility on making sure I saw this through, and being able to work with product man, PMs, developers, this team, that team, to really get this thing to launch and make sure that everyone was happy. Like those are still all valuable, and that still kind of communicates that experience of, yeah, I may not have been there for the entire length to see like all these different product life cycles launch and like live on, but I was still in the trenches when things got rocky, or when we needed to actually get stuff done.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Does
Good
that does
point.
that sound like something you could do with this
Yeah.
Vimeo project in a way?
Yeah. I mean, some of the challenges were like, just bluntly, like they didn't value testing. Like we just
Sure.
shipped things and then we went off the feedback that we got from people on iTunes. And like I would advocate for it, but they shot it down every time. So that's and that
And
was one of the
and to those
challenges.
points as well, right? Like, again, I'd be careful the way you word, they didn't really
Right.
care about testing, right?
Right.
But I would kind of like think of it as like, yeah, we really didn't have time to test because this was such a, this was such a burning objective. After this product launch, I was then moving on to another one, which then kind of builds also the case of maybe your portfolio, or maybe these projects like where you have Vimeo, you have Intuit, maybe it's not just one singular, product. Maybe
Uh-huh.
it encompasses a timeline in some sense of like, yeah, we launched the Vimeo video app, and then I moved on to doing this one, and then I moved on to
Mhm.
doing this one. Um, Again, like with each of those sections, like let's just call each of those projects, if you were to do something like this a section, you'd still want to have some sort of wrap up to kind of like package it up all nicely. Like, yeah, we launched the Vimeo app. We were able to work with iTunes to record
Yeah.
video results or whatever. And that was really our only opportunity at the time to have any sort of tracker until they, decided to improve later on once I moved on to another
Yeah.
project. The next project that, was part of my life cycle at Vimeo, blah, 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 blah. Like there are all these ways to start building up that case while, even though you may not have like, yeah, I launched this big project, and listen, it's like, it kind of happens not so much like as a result of being on really long projects. It's just being mindful a bit, like while you're working there. It's like, oh, I should write this stuff down. And it doesn't happen. It doesn't really click
Right.
to us until we're in these situations.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
like, but still being able to allude to more of, of your time there than just like one app will also
Right.
communicate experience, will also communicate
Yeah.
responsibility, and being able to manage that.
Yeah, I ended up breaking this project up into like 3 features that we launched. So like the first was upload and share, which it's like we literally could not test this because the new iOS has not released, and like Apple wouldn't tell us what it's going to look like, so like there was no way to test. So like that was a real design challenge. And then I broke it down a little bit by process and a little bit of learnings. Did a lot of alert screens. And the second one was logged out browsing, like where we removed the registration wall so people could view videos without being logged in. And then if they tried to comment or like something, they would get prompted to create an account or join.
So not only do
And
I think this one is important to really build that case around the other different not only like just this, but like these are all great points. I wouldn't trash all the information you have here. I think like, again, this is all going to kind of play into the everything that I might have done at Vimeo sort of situation, right? So you keep this structure. But the one thing I do think is also like a really clear kind of like thing that catches after a while is that like this was a while ago. Vimeo, like obviously you're designing in like old iPhone
yeah,
screens, right? So
yeah.
that's really important. That's also like something to acknowledge, that people may be looking at this and being like, wow, this is a lot of like things. A lot of things have changed since then, and that's like really what kind of probably stands out the most is that like, oh, when she did this was like a while ago. iOS has changed so much. What has she worked on in between then? So
Exactly.
I don't know if the stuff that you did at Confluent, like you said, it's kind of private. Yeah,
I mean, I could
it's
show
locked. Is it safe to show on screen recording like this? Is that all right? Or
you. I hesitate.
you can
It's like,
unshare your screen and then maybe send me the link, and we could just talk about it without recording the screen.
okay. Here, let me check. That's the password.
Wonderful. Okay. Correct password. Okay. Okay, so tell me a little bit about this.
So that one is for our developer website, which I kind of treat it like a product because it's not strictly marketing. This site isn't, but it was a complete redesign of their homepage. So the whole like developer website is thousands of pages, but this is just their homepage, and we wanted to reshift the focus to being on newbie developers. So like people who are trying to learn this new technology and they want to know, like, is this the place to go? Yes, this is the official site. This is what we do. So we really tried to change all the messaging and the illustrations, diagrams, everything on the page to cater towards that persona. There's a section where there's like a bunch of research where we looked at competitors and what they were doing and not doing well. And then I threw together like a persona. The company itself has like set personas. So this is kind of one of those where it's like, I'm an engineer. Let me see, what does it say? They're new users who are trying to understand Kafka, which is the technology, and learn how to use it, but it's too hard to get started with it on their own. So yeah, they're just basically trying to learn how to use this and what it is. And so the whole site, each section of the site is a breakdown of a different part of the technology.
Mm.
And there's a lot of content on there. So the strategy was like, how do we show a ton of content in a simple way for like a newbie? And there was one part, the first design section, where it's like we are using this main visual up on top to visually describe what is Kafka. And we did this whole city motif, and it was hated by the stakeholders and developers, but the designers all loved it. So we like redid it, but like made it super, super simple. And then the opposite happened. All the designers hated it, but the engineers loved it. And so then as you scroll down, there's like, we had to go back to research. And so we like looped back on the process and tried to basically marry the two of those, like they had a little baby or something. And so there's some screens on what those look like. And then, yeah, so most of the effort was put into this main image and how we could accurately describe all these things
Did you do these
in the image.
illustrations yourself?
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah. So there's a lot of like technical information in here, but we were trying to do it in a fun way. So we had to get rid of the city motif, sadly, but we
No,
ended up with something like of a nice hybrid, I think. And
sure,
then I
yeah.
also prototype out the illustrations because it animates. So I prototyped the animation. And then I talk about like final designs. It's still in development, like it's actively being developed. So I don't have like any of the real hurdles that engineering has come up with against. But yeah.
Gotcha. Quick note on the portfolio. I
Yeah.
mean, when you're talking in these, when you're talking like when you get to this part of like showing work in these interviews, is it website? Is it just like pulling up a screen and then talking through it, or?
I've been making keynotes.
Okay, cool. All right. Because on the website, the one thing I would say is make sure that your videos all autoplay. And then
Okay.
the other thing that I think is some of the typography is, I think, missing a bit, could be
What you
hitting a
mean?
bit harder. So like, for example, the section that says the process, where you have like all the
Uh-huh.
headings of research and define the problem. I think those need to stand out a little bit more. Obviously, less than the heading of the process, but more from
Uh,
the copy itself.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
I think like those points when seen, like when they stand out and people recognize them, they go, oh, cool. Like, that's just like a small thing. I don't know what your keynotes look like. So just in case, something to maybe
Yeah.
also reflect there. So with this project, what would it be crazy to say everything that you just kind of mentioned to me about like the process that you went through and all that stuff? Is it crazy to think that that process is very similar to, say, like a traditional product design process?
I think it is, but I've gotten a lot of like opinions that it's not, just because this is not a product. So like
Opinions
people
from who
from like
exactly?
people I'm interviewing with.
And they've given you feedback?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's just like
Interesting.
people are being haters because it's technically not like it doesn't look like a product, but like in reality it kind of is.
Sure, but I mean, okay, the disconnect I think with that is you're presenting it as like an initial overhaul,
Mhm.
which leans very much on the side of like marketing. And where
Right.
the product kind of comes in, or that product design thinking comes in, is like, what was again, like thinking of the life cycle, like what points, like what adolescent points did this product face that that can kind of communicate how you were able to iterate and how you were able to take information and use that to inform decisions. Like I think that's where that disconnect is, because again, sure, like one of my last jobs, I was a senior product designer. I worked on e-commerce web all the time. I had like 4 different products essentially. One was the e-commerce engine itself. The one was the consumer facing websites. The other was the brand facing, or consumer customer facing websites, and also a design system thrown in there, right? So like, what about those? Well, for me, what was it like? The question was, what about those makes it a product? Well, we were constantly iterating on the e-commerce engine, the websites, and the design system, or the design system we were constantly adding to. Like we were constantly using all of the business objectives to inform how we make features, how we make decisions, things like that. So like there's no problem, just because it's not an iOS app or some sort of like software doesn't mean it's not a product. But how does a website differ from a product in that sense? Because this is a living thing that continues to grow with the business. That makes it a
Mhm.
product. What were those things that you worked on in between there? Like that's kind of, I think, where the disconnect comes in. Sure, you can
Okay.
have a section if you're thinking about this as like, you're presenting your campaign, your career at Confluence or at Vimeo, you are sort of thinking like, sure, you can have a website launch part there. It's like, oh, this was a project that we did to relaunch, based on these objectives and blah, blah, blah. But again, you need to either go the direction of this is what we did after it launched and continue to work on it. And this is where it's at today. Or you need to put in more pieces of Confluence and Vimeo in there that show that you worked on other products as well. And, after one launched.
Yeah. Okay. So just like shifting the perspective of it a little bit, you think will help?
Yep. Think of it as like you want to frame the conversation to go the way that you want with any of these interviews. So like, I remember I would say, very much as we were talking about with Vimeo before, it's like, I would tee up the conversation and say, this is the video app that we launched while at so-and-so. At the time, we needed to grow mobile users, blah, blah, blah. And I worked, and like, I would even include the timeline. Like I worked on this project from start to launch before moving on to another project. Boom, framed up. Now all you have to do is connect the dots a bit. And that's like your conversation. You give them a heads up. You kind of put them in the mindset that you want them to think.
Make it sound so easy.
Yeah, when you interview a lot, I used to just interview for fun at times, even when I wasn't thinking about leaving my job. And after a while, even when those go wrong, you start to figure out, or you start to think about like, what could I have done better? And because at the end of the day, I just wanted an offer. I just wanted to see who would, like actually give me the job depending on what I was doing. And I didn't get all those interviews at all. Like I just went through a bunch of them just to keep practicing in a sense, knowing that I was going to leave eventually. And when the ones that you don't care about don't give you the job, then you realize you're doing something wrong. So you have to kind of work on it and go from there. So that's kind of where I was able to spend my time learning about in between dilly-dallying and working. So
yeah, that's smart.
So I mean, yeah, does that all make sense? Do you think like there's enough there for you to kind of like have updates and changes to make?
Yeah, I feel like, I just need to focus on how I'm going to talk about this from more of a product viewpoint to make it more product.
Do you have any other interviews set up, or like what's kind of the
I have just
going?
meet and greet, whatever. First time, like a recruiter call. One tomorrow and then one on Thursday. They've really slowed down. Like it was a bunch at first, but like I don't know what happened, but they've just like really slowed down. I would have like 6 or 7 a week, and now I've got maybe 2.
Yeah, so the market is definitely, fluctuating a bit.
I know.
We have a looming quote unquote recession. I think a lot of tech companies are rethinking how they gain investment and how they spend investment. And, the hiring buzz usually starts at the beginning of the year and wanes down towards, this time of the year anyway. So, it's just cycles, but there are still tons of people hiring. Technology is still going to boom and grow. So there's nothing, while, the recruiters may be slowing down a bit because they're also tired. There are still positions out there. So.
Yeah, it's like, that part in your head, it's like, I'm never going to get another job. So I'm trying to manage that.
Yeah, but you do that, and then every time you're like, man, I wish I had another month off or something. Now I know that's kind of dangerous coming from someone who freelances and chooses to not work as much as possible. But how do
you get your clients freelancing?
So a few things, mostly just like hand-to-hand what I call hand-to-hand combat of like messaging them on LinkedIn or whatever. For example, I was listening to a podcast just yesterday and I heard someone talking about an app that was basically bootstrapped by someone like entirely by themselves, still working by themselves. Apparently it's like one of the best apps in this kind of sector. And I was like, maybe I should just message them. Now, I currently have a couple of projects that I'm working on that I'm like waiting to finish. So I kind of go through these ebbs and flows. It's kind of the standard like freelance dilemma where if you're not like actively marketing, even when you're working on projects, you'll come to points where you have dead zones, and that's okay. Cause again, my focus right now isn't necessarily to freelance as much as possible. I've saved up enough over time to kind of wait it out a bit. But I am trying to build out a couple of projects of my own that would hopefully turn into like substitutions for client, being paid by clients.
Yeah, that's cool. Sweet.
So it's it's a back and forth, but I will say that like anytime I do need clients, if the work comes down to like how many people I can message, I can usually get 1 to 2 clients out of 20 messages or something like that.
It's pretty good.
So it's not failed me, but it's a good way to just really get out there and just like being the most direct possible. So.
And you don't use like Upwork or anything?
No, I haven't used Upwork. I've used like Fiverr and Upwork to hire people before, but I've never actually used the marketplaces for my own services. But I have been thinking about it in the sense of having like really specialized services. And this kind of tails into like some of the projects that I'm working on where, it's not necessarily a bad setup if you can really narrow down what it is you're going to offer to people. Now, like I wouldn't go to a Fiverr and Upwork with, hey, I have all this experience and I can do product design and web design. Absolutely not. I think that's where you kind of find yourself getting ripped up at times or, ending up in a bad situation and also kind of undervaluing a little bit of your work or your experience. So instead of saying like, yeah, I could build any kind of website you want, I would have a very, very tailored, this is the website I build. This is what you'll get. These are the changes that you can make. And that's it kind of situation.
Yeah. Sounds smart. Yeah. It's part of this like doomsday mind of mine is like, I'm never going to find another job. Should I just become an independent like contractor or like, should I be a freelancer? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I worked about 10 years, like full-time jobs, going from one place to the other, knowing eventually I would stop and do something on my own, whether it be like starting an agency or, trying to like launch something. So it was all preparation. Not necessarily like directly directed towards you, but like, I wouldn't recommend just being like, I mean, yes, it's something you can fall back on. Yes, you can absolutely freelance. So you could figure that out. If it wasn't planned, I don't think it's a great idea because I think you'll end up going through a very volatile, like high and low. Like it took me probably like 2-3 years to really come to grips with the idea of freelancing. And again, that's like not only just like having to know that I have to go get my own clients, but also like financially preparing and making sure that like what I was going to do in the meantime. And like, if anything did happen, like all of those, that's unfortunately like the kind of person I am. But at the same time, I think it does help because you just don't, kind of like throw yourself into it, find yourself at the deep end at some point and really like start to panic.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay.
But I mean, stick it out. Like I said, I think the job market is going to be a little wavy, but I think, again, like there's no reason to stress yourself out because you're at a month or, a little bit more than a month of time. So,
I try to not do it, but it's tough.
Therapy is great for that at times. So
don't worry, I got a therapist.
definitely helps. Any other questions or anything like that you want to go over outside of like, portfolio website or interviews or anything like that?
I think that's it. Would you suggest that I make a Vimeo? So I have Confluence in its own square. Would you suggest that I bump Vimeo second because it is a real thing?
So really quickly, a note on your homepage.
Yeah.
I would, if these other projects you have no intention of showing, or ever talking about in an interview, and you don't plan on quote unquote freelancing, I would not, I don't find there to be a need to show more than like 3, 4, 5, 6 projects. With that said, if again, we didn't even touch on these, I don't know if these are anything of value. That kind of is on you, but if they're not meaty enough for the interviews that you're currently taking, I would skip them. Because again, like we kind of run ourselves into this situation of like, oh, we see all these amazing design agencies and studios that have so much work. We need to show so much work, but you're not a design agency. You are a singular person going for roles at companies that are very like looking for very specific things. Showing some of this extra stuff can be kind of messy. Doesn't mean like you need to take them all off, but let's just say like you make a homepage that is like the 3 most popular projects that you're going to talk about every time, and then another tab that says like work, and then you have all of your projects. I also think it would be interesting and probably a little bit helpful to reorganize how you display this information. I'm not a fan of just like the big tiles of projects where there's no information, because it feels, one, I don't know what I'm going to end up clicking into. Someone might click into something you don't want them to click in. And I think again, you want to frame this up. Like a portfolio is just like how we were talking about with framing the conversation. Like I want to be able to send this link to someone, know exactly like the few things that they're going to click on and have a good reaction. And like, I'll show my, let's see if I can get to my website. It may or may not work. So one thing I noticed a lot when I was interviewing, and even when I wasn't taking them seriously, is that this way of organizing work on your portfolio makes it very clear what you want people to click on. So like there's a lot of negative space, things come in, after as they scroll, blah, blah, blah. But almost every time, every first call I had, people were like, man, I really love this project. Like, did you do everything? Like, what did you do? Blah, blah, blah. Because it was the first thing they saw. There was nothing else. It's the biggest photo. It's the biggest kind of image on this page. And after like so many people had told me like, yeah, I saw this project, it became really easy to talk about it. Like I could just go through this like within 5 minutes, no problem, after a couple of calls. And I knew after that first conversation, I was going to get another interview.
Okay.
So I think like being a little bit, not cautious, but like being a little bit mindful of how you present projects, how you, kind of arrange them on the page, the size, all that stuff is going to play into like what people are looking at, how they are reacting, and what they want to talk to you about.
Okay. Cool. Did you use a template for this, or did you code that yourself?
This is so it was built on WordPress. I haven't updated it in years. But it's built on WordPress using a tool called Simplice, and it was really cool. I'm actually in the process of like taking that website down, taking the work down, and reshifting things anyway. But if I had to use it again, I would. Like if I was going to update my portfolio and go for a full-time role, sure. But at the moment, like that isn't a priority for me, so I wouldn't want to work in WordPress again.
WordPress is heavy.
What are you using for your website?
I coded it myself. So
Ooh.
Vimeo and CSS.
Yeah, I remember I did that, and then I learned about all the no-code tools and never did it again.
Yeah, well, it's pretty like basic. There's nothing too crazy going on. So, but
I wouldn't say now, but at some point in the future, I think you need to get on something like maybe not Webflow. I don't know. Honestly, like if you're a product person, you might really like Framer. Framer is a really cool tool. I'm actually really excited to start using it more. I use Webflow for all of my client projects because I know there's going to be a level of design that I'm willing to work through in that setting to make sure everything is nice and polished. Whereas I think Framer personally, like I would 100% build my website, build my portfolio on it tomorrow, because It makes it really easy to update. It makes it really easy to design pages very uniquely. So like if you wanted to design one project page specifically different from another, that's fine. Whereas in Webflow, you have to be a little bit more intricate and a little bit more kind of like thoughtful with how you're going to design separate pages and things like that.
Yeah.
So definitely not, I wouldn't say rush it now necessarily because you're in interview mode and you want to get a job, but at some point in the future, and listen, if in a month and a half, 2 months, nothing has changed whatsoever, you have no leads, whatever, then maybe come to the, hey, let's redesign a portfolio and redo some of this stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, thank you.
No problem. So I'm working on this document that'll have like a couple of notes in here from this conversation, and I'll have the link to this recording as well. After this, you'll get like an email. It's like a survey. It's like 2 or 3 questions. If you don't mind filling it out, it'd be super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's nice to meet you, Ashley. Have a good day. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me.
Okay. Well, thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.